There are a lot of reasons why we would build multifamily elevator apartments, even at a lower density. They provide accessibility. They allow for a secured point of entry and a distribution of people past an observable place. And they often are a way that we can provide a lot of units around a core of services, not necessarily high-rise, but in a way that provides certain kind of efficiency. So the multifamily elevator apartment building is the sixth of our typologies. In the diagram you can see on the upper left-hand corner here, we've indicated a whole block that is exclusively multifamily. In reality, in many older American cities, multifamily elevator buildings simply responded to market pressures. And we find them not just isolated in places where they are with other buildings of that same kind, but often on corners, near transit, and near downtown. Here, in fact, our first example is in a suburban area. It's an elevator four-story building in the suburban affluent community of Redmond, Washington, built as a YWCA for homeless women in a homeless supportive living environment. And the elevator building allowed for people with any disability to live on any floor, which was a program requirement. Also, the Y wanted to be able to make it easier for women to get their groceries up and down, single women often with more than one child living here, and that was a very important convenience factor. Now, the density seems a little lower than you would imagine at 21 units an acre. The reason this building may appear more dense than it would otherwise is the entire ground floor is devoted to non-residential uses, counseling rooms, childcare centers, and other kind of uses. The other is it's set way, way back from the street with a lot of open space for play yard for the kids and also just to reflect that kind of suburban character. On the other hand, the architect's done everything he could in order to take that massing and break it up. It looks like a Northwest Lodge. The height varies. There are brackets and shingles and all kind of roof forms that diminish what could have been overwhelming scale of this building. When it went up, it was the tallest building in Redmond other than commercial buildings such as Marriott, Court, hotels, etc. So it also had to withstand a rigorous design review to be acceptable. Now, that building, because one of the four floors was not residential, and because of all the setbacks and other kind of design features, actually achieved a density of 21 units an acre. Now let's look at City Center Plaza, an urban building of the same height, similarly sculpted to make the upper stories appear setback, but very tight up on the street. 46 units an acre, almost twice the density, because it's an urban site. In this case, the building is on a large site. It has a UC extension and commercial on the ground floor, so it's very similar to the Y in that the ground floor is almost entirely taken up by stores and by parking, one space for each unit. But then you walk or take an elevator up to the next level, and it's an open mews, pedestrian mews, 1 block long, and it gives you access to 2- and 3-story units once you get into the development. Hisman Hinu in Oakland is a building that uses a similar strategy of mixing heights and building styles to connote that part of the building is an elevator building and part is a townhouse. And it's similar to some of the other developments that we will see in trying to break down what could be the potentially overwhelming mass of a large building, large either in height or in length along a street. And you can see from this view that a lot of work has been done to break the massing of the building up, uses of colors, roof overhangs, and different elements that make it look like a more traditional series of buildings along a street facade. When you get into the interior courtyard, you realize that all of that building that's on the street has afforded the ability to provide an enormous amount of open space behind the facade. So these urban apartment buildings look very dense from the street, but offer a surprising amount of open space, livable, wonderful space. There's a child care center. There are private terraces for the townhomes. There's shared common balconies at the corners of the apartment building off of community rooms. So at every level, there's some kind of access to sun, light, and fresh air. And Hisman Hinu is an interesting project because the elevator portion of Hisman Hinu is actually at a higher density, obviously because it's an elevator building with smaller units. It achieves 85 units an acre, and the 3-story townhomes on the back are 35 units an acre. Here in Roxbury, Massachusetts, now this is an interesting building because the lower level units are walk-ups. As you can see, they're accessed right off the street. And the building is even partially set down into the ground, a New England tradition. The upper level units are on an elevator corridor. That is, you can get to them by way of an elevator. So it's a hybrid. It allows that sense of a townhouse on one side with all the convenience of an apartment building on the other. And similar to Hisman Hinu, right up on the street with the height on the street is a trade-off for an amazing amount of open space behind. In this case, one of the great things about this particular development that allows it to have such abundant open space, unlike Hisman Hinu, is there was only a requirement of 1 car for every 4 units in this complex. And this complex married historic renovated buildings with new housing. So by doing that, it left a huge amount of space on the site for open space. No underground parking. Parking is entirely in a small surface lot. And then adjacent to it is the much bigger play area. Hisman Hinu has an entire story of covered parking upon which about 2/3 of the development occurs, and then there's some stores on the other third. And that expense of raising the building up and putting parking under it is saved here at the Roxbury Corners, and it also freed up the open space at the ground to truly be at ground and therefore have grass and other natural materials. Plaza del Sol in San Francisco is a kind of hybrid between the two that we looked at before. At 76.5 units an acre, it combines 4-story flats ganged around a kind of European elevator with 3-story walk-ups and 2-story townhouses. And it has very deep units facing the street. But as soon as you go into the site, a narrow side mews for pedestrians widens out and becomes a kind of public promenade that provides access to all the units from behind. So it's a cross between the two. It did require an enormous amount of parking because the development replaced a lot that was used by a community theater. And so, believe it or not, this affordable housing had to build parking for 120 cars underneath it all in order to mitigate the loss of parking for a community theater. It was an expense that was borne by the development, but it was part of the consequence of finding a terrific site. And by raising up the site and ramping up to the top of the garage, most people don't realize there is 2 full stories of parking underneath the plaza. At Langham Court in Boston, this is a large site. And as we do have large sites, often large apartments, there are opportunities when one does large apartments, that is, for developing the interior courtyards of scale that create the kind of open space we need. Both at the previous Plaza del Sol and at Hisman Hinu, the actual open space, although it feels ample, is shaped by the narrow dimensions of the depths of the lot. At Langham Court, here again, some of the units are actually accessed from the street by stairs. In this case, 4-story walk-up building, 1 wing. And then, if we look at from the air on the upper left-hand side of this shot, the complex includes an elevator building, walk-ups, and it surrounds a beautiful park, which is a quasi-public park. It's on the surface of an underground parking garage, but it's open to the public during the day and locked at night. This was the compromise. The developers were a little concerned about safety and security in the neighborhood and the potential problems of being the stewards of a public park at night that was open at all hours. The neighbors, on the other hand, although they appreciated the affordable housing, desperately wanted a park. And the compromise is a privately developed park, open to the public, and open during the day. And as you can see, a lot of traditional detailing break down the mass and scale of the building, and it fits very handsomely into its Boston neighborhood. And Langham Court actually achieved a pretty good overall density, especially because it included some elderly units, which are smaller. It was able to achieve about 80 units an acre. Tent City, which was done in a different part of Boston, mixes an 8-story elevator building, which we can see at the far end of this photo, with a series of 3- and 4-story walk-up buildings, and it achieves a density closer to 95 units an acre, similarly mixing units entered right at grade or up a flight of stairs from the street and elevator access to the upper floors. Now, this is an East Coast model we've been looking at in many ways. The traditional brick elevator building, the mixture of row houses with front stoops. What's interesting to see is that model is something that is buried in some cases in other American cities, buried by time, and being rediscovered. In Los Angeles, for instance, this new Hope Village in downtown Los Angeles has really attracted a lot of attention for three reasons. One is to do 5-story housing for families was considered to be going against the grain of HUD and other agencies that claim that high-rise and high density is bad for families. The second thing is that the development actually included a lot of public services that were provided by private nonprofits for the entire neighborhood. And so a lot was riding on this development, which is part of a master plan redevelopment area. And so much of the ground floor is open to the community. And the third and interesting thing about this development is it uses a Type 3 construction type that allowed a full 5 stories to be done in wood frame construction, one of the first in California. So with all the benefits communicated to the public, open space, a courtyard, drop-in teen center, a child care center, and other things, the new approach of a Type 3 building was an economical way to build the building and to try and at least reduce the construction cost to offset the cost of all the public benefits. And this development does have substantial setbacks from the street. It has 20-foot setbacks from the street, very unusual, but a very wonderful feature in this part of Los Angeles, which is in a transitional neighborhood between downtown buildings right up on the street and 1920s and 30s apartment buildings with a Southern California tradition of 15-foot wide setbacks. In this case, a lot of shrubbery and greenery on the street. And a new public park is going in 3 blocks away. This development is actually at about 100 units an acre, depending on how you calculate one aspect of the site, which is actually flexible units, somewhere between 90 and 100 units an acre, depending on whether they're occupied by one or more families. 555 Ellis Street uses a setback at the top floor, barely visible in this photo, and covers 75% of its lot. And through that secret top floor and the high lot coverage, plus a requirement of only 1 car for every 4 units, it was able to achieve 122 units an acre because it's high coverage and because the ground floor doesn't have to be eaten up by cars. The manager's unit, social service agency space, laundry, and a lot of public rooms are on the ground floor. Again, surprising, but like some of the other examples, the requirement for parking being lower and the ability to cover most of the lot with a building allowed a building to only go to 4 or 5 stories that in other circumstances might have had to go higher. Once we get up to those kind of densities, most buildings are having to go higher. Here at Cascade Court, in the foreground, there's a 3-story family building, but behind it a 5-story elderly building. Extremely compact development and very high lot coverage. This is made possible because the site includes the retention of a beautiful old historic building. The Tudor mansion you see on the left was owned by someone who donated the land for the new affordable housing specifically for that public purpose. In return, that wonderful house and its yard provide the breathing room and the visual open space that allow the density of Cascade Court to be livable. Cascade Court is a surprising 151 units an acre, and no portion of it rises more than 5 stories above grade, and that's because it's what's called a high coverage building, and because a lot of the units are small studios and 1-bedrooms for seniors, and because there's a full story of parking under the ground of it. This building, which was photographed just at completion and with the maturity of the street trees is already fitting in better to the neighborhood, is an example of traditional apartments in the Northwest, in this case a 5-story building also in Seattle. And it's interesting to compare this one to Cascade Court because this is only 96 units an acre but looks bigger. Now why is that? It's because it's all family units with the bigger bedrooms. It also had a larger parking requirement, and the entire ground floor at this busy intersection is commercial. All of that forced the building up an average of 1 more floor higher than Cascade and produced fewer units. Not visible in the slide, but very attractive, is the site is a triangle shape, and at the point of the V there's a round tower, but as the site opens up there's a large open space that faces south and gets a lot of sun. Finally, just some examples that higher buildings can be designed well and fit into neighborhoods, although these are in the exceptional larger cities in America, and not many nonprofits are doing these. Eden House and Promise Place in Washington, D.C. combine the renovation of a 5-story brick townhouse with a mixed 7- and 8-story elevator apartment. And the design has been lauded for how well it fits into the old character of this neighborhood in Washington, D.C. The building actually is L-shaped and wraps itself around, that is the new one, around the old townhouses. And so there's an awful lot of common open space on this site. One of the reasons it had to go to the height it went to is it's also a building that houses people with supportive housing needs. So there are an awful lot of facilities that occupy the ground floor in the building, thus forcing the building up one additional story. It does get to 101 units an acre. So it is in the same range as the Bellevue Olive Apartments, which were at 96. Yet it also illustrates that both at Ellis Street and at Cascade Apartments, where you don't have those large social service needs and where you're not trying to provide an enormous large open space on a site, you can achieve similar densities in a 5-story building that, in this case, required the development to go to 7 stories. Finally, a typical SRO in Chicago or an eastern city is a building that has virtually no open space. And when the studios, which is a new building but built to look like one of those grand old Chicago warehouses converted to housing, or one of those very straightforward Chicago original office buildings, when it was proposed, it could have all been done in 4 or 5 stories. It would have left no open space on the site. In this case, the decision was to go to 7 and 8. In an L-shaped building, it's an urban area, and a tremendous amenity, an enormous landscaped open space on the site, makes this one of the most livable places in Chicago for people who are low income and wanting to live in studio apartments. With this, we end the case studies, and as you can see, we've gone all the way from 7 units an acre in single family to 236 units an acre in downtown Chicago. A stunning variety of ways that clever architects and their developers have looked around them, looked at the character of their neighborhood, worked with their city officials, thought about their clients, and worked hard to make density through good design livable for residents and complementary to the neighborhood.